Somewhere in the middle of the two extremes lies a world of open discourse. Probing the depths of the in-between. Welcome to Gray Matters Radio with your host, Michael DeVine.
Good evening. Welcome to another installment of Gray Matters Radio. So what actually is Gray Matters Radio? Well, Gray Matters Radio is a show that operates somewhere in the world of the in-between. What is this in-between that you ask? Well, unless you have been sleeping under a rock for your whole life, you know that we have these two things called political parties. And this show lives somewhere in the gray area of the in-between. Crazy idea, I know, living in and being in between. But for me, I'm actually colorblind, so I couldn't really identify a political party, even if I really wanted to. So I figured, why not drag more people into gray with me so I'm not alone? So I am your host, Michael DeVine, your tour guide of the gray. And what qualifies me to be your guide on this journey, you ask? Well, I'm a counselor. I am a counselor with a conscience. A man who's been tasked with saving the world one person, one family at a time. The man who saw the world going down the drain from his therapist chair and felt guilty and decided to take his brand of therapy and apply it to the world. So, welcome everybody. It's been an interesting week. It's been a really kind of interesting week. And, on this journey, I had to bring my dad in here. I know everyone's probably thinking, I had to bring my daddy kind of with me on this journey. But no, I had to bring my dad with me on this one because a lot of what was going on this week, Michael Cohen, his testimony with George Bush passing away, and there's just a lot kind of going on. And I always lean on my dad. We call him the professor because he knows his stuff. And so I want to bring him here today. Dad, you there?
I'm here.
All right. So thanks for coming in tonight. I know it's a little bit late. We got the Eagles going on, so we really must be dedicated to doing the show if we are taking a little bit of a break and watching or listening to this instead of watching the Eagles. So hopefully we won't lose any street cred of our Eagles fandom out here, right?
All right.
So it was a crazy week. I mean, we had George Bush dying, and it's pretty bad because I was probably, 12, 13, 14-ish when Bush was president before Clinton took over. And so a lot of what I really remember about George Bush was really what I saw on Saturday Night Live. That or just read my lips, no new taxes. That's really all I remember. But it seemed like he was a really good guy. It seems like from what I understand, and Dad, maybe you can kind of correct me on this one, but it really seemed as though Bush he lied. He was on a campaign trail, said no new taxes, and then basically he had to raise taxes. And it didn't matter how good the Gulf War went. It seems like he didn't really recover from that. I mean, is that an oversimplification, or would you say that's kind of it in a nutshell?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit oversimplification. There was a heck of a lot of other items that were going on there. As when he made that pledge, from the time he made that pledge to the time he got into office, there was a lot of issues dealing with Social Security. There was the savings and loan bailouts that took place there. There was a stock market crash that took place. So, did he get hit by his own party by it? But it was items that, and I really respected him. He was another profile in courage. I think if John Kennedy was writing another chapter into his book, he would have had to write that into there as going against the pledge when he knew that that was the only way he was going to bail out and keep the economic process moving. So he sacrificed alienating parts of his party, the right-wing part of the party, and then also taking the hit with that no new taxes. But I think when you take it there is the problem. When he ran against Clinton, we were going into a recession at the time. And it's very, very hard to run in a recession as the president and expect to try to get elected.
And that's that's the thing I've heard over and over about Bush Sr. is that he was a man of integrity, that it didn't matter if it looked awful, if it was the right thing to do, he basically would do it. And that's one thing that you heard about him time and time again. I mean, this guy was a career, he was a military guy, he led the CIA. I mean, this guy literally was a career military, intelligence, politics, and not one time did you ever really hear anything bad about him, did you?
Yeah, no, not at all. And, he had some run-ins. He had a Democratic Congress that he was, during his presidency, both houses of Congress were controlled by the Democrats. And, he ran into a lot of issues working with the Democrats there, with Tip O'Neill. There were some pretty strong figures at that point, but the things that he wanted to try to do, but he was one who did go with bipartisan. He did try to find the common ground, and he never lost sight of the American people. Yeah, and it was whatever was going to be good. He wanted to make sure the American people were taken care of.
And that was the thing. I remember being, Gulf War was at 91, so I was about 11, 12 years old. And that was one of the things that stood out to me. It was kind of scary. It was like the first time a war ever had broken out. And there was the way he spoke, the way he talked to the country, the way he explained things. You just had this sense of calm that things were being taken care of. He was in charge. And it was something that it jumped out at me as a kid, even though he was easy to make fun of. I mean, Dana Carvey did a really good job, but even that, I mean, he went on Saturday Night Live and made fun of himself. He actually, if you look at the juxtaposition with Trump making fun of Saturday Night Live, almost having his feelings hurt, basically, but he was the one actually going on there and making fun of himself. I heard a story today where he would call people up. He was a huge baseball fan, and he would randomly call people up just to talk baseball, to talk sports, to ask them about their family. And they said that's what made him such a good president, is that if you were going to work bipartisanly, you had to humanize people. You had to actually show them that you cared. And that was literally the only way that you were actually going to get things accomplished. And I've heard a lot of these stories. It's funny how when someone takes someone to die, where you actually hear all these amazing stories. Was there any one Bush memory that just really jumped out at you that was like, hey, he really was a good guy?
Again, he was only there for 4 years, which is a shame. But there was a lot of issues that he had to go up against in 92. But I think what you said, I think when the Gulf War, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the uncertainty, the oil supply. I think we as Americans were really wondering what are we getting into? I think there was the Vietnam syndrome. Are we getting ourselves set up to be put into another long war? Are we going to, if we do have to commit troops, how are they going to be committed? And I think I think the one night when he came on TV, I really do feel as though he acted as a leader. He was the commander in chief, and we were going to be okay. And what was going on. I think I remember him that for his unbelievable leadership, and then he taking the heat when Colin Powell and they were all looking at the highway of death and wanting to know if they should go to Baghdad at that point. And a lot of the military and everybody else was saying, well, let's go. And he said that, he made the decision. This isn't Korea. Our mandate was to free Kuwait. We're done. And also realizing if he would go into a Baghdad, he could have upset the whole balance of the Middle East. So I just really feel as though he was the right person for that time, at the right time, in the world affairs at that point.
It's like he was only there for 4 years, but he really helped set the stage, for, the next 8 years pretty much.
Yeah. I think for the people that came after him, with, the Clintons and the Bush's son after that, I think he set up the world the geopolitical arena and what America's role was going to be in that arena. You know, and it was up to Clinton, his son, then which way he was going to go.
That's what's always said, is that, you know, he didn't really, it seems like he never really got the credit that he deserved till many, many years later when you kind of trace back some of the policies and what worked and what didn't. And that, hey, the guy really got a, you know, not to say a raw deal, but, you know, he really did a lot in just 4 years. And yeah, I think what was really amazing, it's been making the rounds lately, the letter that George Bush left for Clinton. Now, I remember Jill and I, my wife, we went to the Clinton Museum in Little Rock one year. We were actually out there for a Dave Matthews concert. We're like, hey, what are you doing between going and getting drunk at a concert? Let's go to Bill Clinton's museum. It seemed like it matched up really well. And so one of the things that jumped out at me was this letter. They had it on display there. And I remember even back then, it really jumped out at me then. And I mean, I'm going to read. It's a real short letter, but so this was waiting for Bill Clinton on his desk. It says, Dear Bill, when I walked into this office just now, I felt the same sense of wonder and respect that I felt 4 years ago. I know you will feel that too. I wish you great happiness here. I never felt the loneliness some presidents have described. There will be very tough times, made even more difficult by the criticism you may not think is fair. I'm not a very good one to give advice, but just don't let the critics discourage you or push you off course. You will be our president when you read this. I wish you well, and I wish your family well. Your success now is our country's success, and I am rooting hard for you. Good luck, George. I mean, think about like the rhetoric and the environment that we're in right now, and can you imagine anybody leaving a note like this for the next president? You really can't.
In this day and age?
No.
Because I really do think the presidency changed. You know, I think the election of Clinton brought in a new level, you know, the presidency. And I don't know. I think George Bush, as I sit back and I think about it, is, you know, would he have won 92 if Ross Perot hadn't thrown his hat in the ring as a third party candidate? You know, and I was sitting there tonight thinking about it all, you know, and going, God, you know, you had Clinton coming in with less than 50% of the vote at the popular vote. Ross Perot had about 19 million votes or whatever, you know, and Bush was, I think he had 41 or whatever. And I always sit and think about it. I said, you know, had Ross Perot stayed out of the game, I really do think that Bush would have been elected.
Well, but Perot was he was in it. He dropped out of it and came back into it. But wasn't he leading?
Then he dropped in. Then he came back in.
Yeah, he was leading though when he left, right? And wasn't the excuse that, well, I was only doing it to get people's attention? But then he dropped out.
He was fearful. If I remember correctly, it was something that he was fearful of his life. Or
really?
Something. It was something really weird, and I'm sitting there going, God, you know, this whole scenario is starting to change, you know, from where you had the Kennedys, the Johnsons, and, you know, the Richard Nixons, for whatever everybody says about Richard Nixon, you know, and then you brought on Gerald Ford after, you know, the Nixon Watergate shenanigans, and then you had Jimmy Carter, who comes in. You know, the presidency was changing, but I really do feel as though George Bush was what we consider to be what a chief executive of the United States should be. You know, and you know, there weren't any scandals, you know, during his thing. Family was everything. You know, integrity. You know, there was always a sense that there was stability. I mean, you had the Soviet Union collapsing at the time. You know, it was the final, you know, the Soviet Union was breaking down at that point, you know, and we were going to start entering an all new world with the fact of the the ending of the Cold War. And I really felt as though that was the type of executive that we really needed to run the country.
And what was
know,
really,
but,
but think about, I mean, I think this is actually really, really interesting because, and this is like, if you look at, I think you nailed best, there wasn't really a lot of scandals, or at least like these like kind of tabloid scandals. And really, I know W, was technically, a pilot in the Guard. We're not going to get into that one. But, I mean, Bush was the last president that really was a military guy, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
And he was the last guy.
No, he was lasted a World War II generation, the greatest generation.
And think about it. I mean, there's politics. Everyone knows there are politics, but he totally... he put away everything going, you're our president now. And then think about the juxtaposition of where we're at right now. And just even in recent days, I mean, think about, we had the architect of the bin Laden raid, basically calling out, going, listen, the number one threat to our country, our republic, is rhetoric. We had I think it was the lieutenant colonel who was a Fox News contributor, and he literally left. Fox News, saying that the rhetoric is really killing everybody, and that this really is going to be the biggest problem that we have right now. We have Chief Justice John Roberts. Now, I don't think John Roberts was a military guy, but even he was coming out there and saying that, listen, this is definitely not a good thing, all of this rhetoric. And now think about, you and I were talking about impeachments because this was a big week. I mean, I think Michael Cohen basically came out, and Matt, and I think you had a great correlation with this, but he basically came out and said that, we were lying. Basically, he was saying that he was lying, and he basically lied about everything that basically he told Congress. Literally everything that he told Congress. He was completely. So basically, he was completely lying about what he told Congress, and so we have a guy basically going, "I lied to you about Trump's business dealings with Congress," and then now all of a sudden things have escalated a little bit. Now, Dad, you were saying that this very much resembles John Bean, correct? And that when John Dean, and that he was basically, when he went and testified and started saying that people were lying, these things were really happening, everything started escalating with the Nixon impeachment. So help me understand that a little bit.
Broke a little bit what was going on. At first it was something neat, but then your colleges, your universities, your press, they all started to sense something was going on into there, especially when the fact that the Watergate burglars, were all either campaign aides or related to the committee to reelect the president, and all this money was in this thing. This is before you had the passage of the election reform bills that were part of the Watergate aftermath. And Dean was the special counsel, and when the indictments were coming in, the subpoenas, they were holding the hearings. Nixon tried to prevent all of his people from testifying on the fact of executive privilege, and essentially Dean had to go before the fact of the indictments and all that. And it was there that during these conversations that essentially you basically, in America, I always said basically the difference, and don't get me wrong, I did not like Richard Nixon when he ran against John Kennedy. I was a big John Kennedy fan, but I did like Nixon for the fact of how he conducted the war once he became president. and being involved in the war when he was president. But there was a tradition amongst presidents that you save the leader. Okay, you take the sacrifice, you take the bullet, and everything else. And when John Dean realized that he was out there alone and he was going to be all by himself, and Nixon was urging people to plead guilty, I think what happened is Dean basically was the rat that left the sinking ship. And basically he was the guy who, hey, look, I'm not going to take the fall for this guy. I don't care who you are. So now a tradition got broken. Almost every president has had a fall guy to take the heat off in Dean. But Dean is the guy who broke it open, who knew everything and everything that was going on. He was in on every meeting, and he is the one who told everybody there were tapes. Okay, that's where you started getting into the Watergate, the Nixon tapes.
So basically,
that opened up the whole thing.
So he basically, so
Cohen
saying it's lying. So Cohen basically saying, listen, we've been lying to you, at least I've been lying to you about Trump's dealings with Russia, is the same exact thing as Dean basically saying, oh, no, there's tapes. There really are. It's not a lie. There really are tapes. Now, why was that the linchpin with the Nixon? Why was that the big kind of, why did that matter so much?
Because at every point in turn, God, it's a long thing, but at every point in turn, Nixon was denying his culpability in any of this Watergate, okay, and actually was using, when the FBI started to really investigate. Now, you also had Woodward and Bernstein, who wrote All the President's Men, and you had the Deep Throat, to where Nixon and the Haldeman's, Haldeman, and I'm trying to think, Colson, and I'm trying to think of the others. These guys are all trying to stymie the FBI investigation. And now what they did is they started using the CIA to block the FBI, which is now getting into where the government is overstretching. The Nixon was starting to overstretch their power to prevent. So it was a misuse of power plus obstruction of justice. So all these are going on by all this, and then all of a sudden, bam, here comes the fact that these tapes were actually recorded, and Nixon held every one of the meetings in his office. And now will be on these tapes every dialogue that went on between the committee to reelect the president, his head, and also the fact that he knew it and he covered it up. So now all of a sudden then comes after these revelations. I mean, these hearings, I was back on the GI Bill when these were starting to go, and I think I was a junior under GI Bill when the hearings were started. The hearings were carried. You didn't have CNN. You didn't have your 24-hour news networks. You had the commercial. These hearings, the Dean testimonies, were being broadcast live the whole day. I mean, I would go from class to class, and most of the profs had TVs, so we could see the hearings and going on. People were now starting to ask a lot of questions. We had just had the Pentagon Papers that came out, and there was mistrust that's showing that the government lied about Vietnam. Now all of a sudden you're starting to hear this. John Dean is telling you all this. So now all of a sudden here comes the fact there's tapes. And so when the Senate investigation, who was investigating it, petitioned the White House for the tapes, they subpoenaed the tapes, and Nixon refused to give them the tapes based on the fact that those were executive privilege. You couldn't have it. And then Nixon gives them an abbreviated version, which wasn't going to pass. to where it actually goes to the Supreme Court, okay, which is the United States versus Nixon, in which then the Supreme Court disagrees with Nixon and orders the release of the tapes. And when the tapes come out, there's even missing. They had been, if you remember how everybody went against, when we got Hillary's emails, there's erasures. There was missing that it looked as though they were erased, but the smoking gun was on Nixon. He knew about the whole thing. It goes through the whole plot. And when that came out, essentially that is when, the curtain was down on Nixon at that point. The tapes brought down the Nixon presidency, and articles. I mean, the House committee on the impeachment had voted to move it to the floor to go, to go for articles of impeachment based on obstruction of justice, misuse of power. I mean, and then basically it was the leaders of the Republican Party, the stalwart, even Democrats, telling them you're not going to make it. You will be impeached by the House. And it was almost 100% certain that he would be tried and convicted and removed from office, which the United States could not afford this. Not at the time, because our country was so divided because of the war, because of civil rights, because of the assassinations that had taken place, the mistrust of government through the Pentagon Papers. And then what Nixon did with the use of the government and using the IRS on people, spying on people, you had a government that almost was ready to collapse. And we had economic issues that were so bad, of hyperinflation, high unemployment. It's what the term we came in was called stagflation. We had wage price controls in place. Plus then we had the wars going on in the Middle East, in which we had the Yom Kippur War between the Arab states and Israel, and in which, while this was all going on, the United States, Nixon and the United States are trying to end the war there, in which there is almost a World War III between the United States and Russia over there. We have the first oil embargoes that ever happened in the United States. So the country was just at the point where it could have imploded at any point in time. I mean,
well, and that's the thing. It's like I'm hearing you basically talk, about this. It basically almost sounds like the most awful thing. Basically, almost like the most awful thing ever. Because I know, watching a lot of this and everything that's going on right now, and even for me right now, listening to all this and watching all this, it almost scares the crap out of me. And I mean, now, Dad, the way you describe it, it seems like the most awful thing in the world. I mean, what was it like for you just to sit back and watch this as an American? Because how old were you at the time when all this was going on?
I was 22, 23. That's it, 21. I was 23. Yeah, I was about 23, going on 24.
Now, did you just get back from Vietnam, or had you not even left yet?
Oh, no, I was back. I was out. I was back in school.
And that's right.
So I was going through the school, and basically I was defending Richard Nixon. That your grandfather, your Uncle Butch, your Uncle Andy, and your grandmother, they threw me out of the house one day. They literally threw me out. I was in the middle of dinner. My dad, who, Grandpa was very opinionated, but he was a very good Irish Catholic Democrat. And so was my brother and everybody. And, that was that's what everybody was talking about. The war. When is this thing going to end? We got this Watergate, where at that point, when this was all going on, there's another aspect that the Watergate was what happened with the Russian collusion with going after the Democratic headquarters That's what Watergate started as, was they were tapping the Democratic offices in the Watergate building. And when the reason why they had already tapped it, and they were getting information, and they were using this information to to ruin Democratic candidates. So they were trying to use the same thing as WikiLeaks and emails, everything. And then they stopped. The taps stopped. They weren't getting information, so they sent the guys back in to put in a different microphone so they could. That's when they got caught.
Wow.
That's when this whole thing blew up. But I mean, there were people in college we were talking about in '72 because of the fact that Nixon was paranoid. Like, Trump is narcissistic. Nixon was paranoid. Nixon was so fearful of always losing, even though he was riding high in the polls. I mean, the people loved him. I mean, they hated him, but they loved him. He was sure to re-election, but he was so insecure and paranoid, he agreed to all these shenanigans because he was trying to engineer who would be the Democratic candidate that he would run against to assure that he was going to be the president. And that there were people that were talking about that Congress should postpone the '72 election. I'm sitting there going, God, this whole place is going crazy. But it really wasn't until that I really started, for me, that when I started to listen now closer to John Dean, is when I started to think that something really, it started to really shake my whole view of government.
And this is where I think is really, really kind of interesting about the idea of being a soldier, a veteran who, put your life on the line, who watched people close to you, give their lives, and seeing this crap, watching your elected officials who have put a lot of the people over there in that war and watching all this happen. And I can't even imagine the frustration and just what that is actually even like. And now, Dad, we're actually now. Hey, Ron, are you there? Oh, I thought we were going to bring Ron in. One of our good buddies actually was attempting to kind of call him. We're going to try to get him back here. Ron's actually a veteran. But we'll try to get him back here in a second. But that, like, as a veteran, what goes to your mind, like, realizing that just however many months ago, years ago, you gave your life defending a country and watching this happen?
You mean as far as from the Watergate or what's going on now?
Going back on then, when you're like literally, how many months? How long have you been back? When all the Nixon stuff.
I went over in '69 and came back in late '70, that. But I was a different person. I volunteered to go over. I really didn't start going against the war until about 6 months into my tour, when I started seeing the bullshit. But I really do feel. I really do feel at that point that I really do think we could have won the war with Richard Nixon. I really do. And I mean, I know people, they argue, but I think Nixon was the only one that who knew the communist mind, and he was scaring the shit out, when we went into Cambodia and some of the other areas that we were doing. I mean, if everybody wouldn't have gone where we had the war protests, we had, the proclamation that we could only be in there, I think it was going to be 60 days. We only could go so far. Then we had to pull out. I really do feel as though if we could have, we could have moved them to the peace table, and we could have came out with an honorable peace, at that point. So I think it was really, I started going against the war after Cambodia, when I realized this is bull, with all the politicians. But I really didn't surprise me that this was going on, but not to the extent until I realized it. And then I started getting really ticked off at that point that, this was, all my thoughts and everything else about our government and everything else, that we weren't any better than, some of the people that we were trying to villainize, like the Russians, the Chinese, and all that stuff. So, I think it was a real downer as far as on our leaders. That's why I'll tell you the truth. The only election I never voted in was the 76 election, because I could really give a crap. At that point, I backed away from voting because I didn't really feel as though it meant anything anymore. I was just a pawn. I was just a pawn to be screwed with.
So basically, it was almost like
it made you ran.
So basically, it made you lose almost all faith, pretty much, in your elected officials and your government.
Oh, I hated them. I hated them with a passion. I thought they were all liars. When everything started coming out of what this whole thing was all about, I just said, it's bad enough, with after the Kennedy assassinations, Robert and John, the Martin Luther King, the Pentagon Papers, and all that. I'm sitting there going, this government is, this government could be a little bit crooked somewhere along the line, So I dropped out. I really actually did drop out of any activity or even caring about what the government was doing.
Well, and that's where you got to sit there and then go, now bring ourselves back a little bit more to the present. Like when you're seeing what's going on with Trump now and what's happening with, the testimony and then just the BS. I mean, do you look at it as it's the same damn thing? I mean, literally, is it almost okay? I mean,
I just look at it saying, you know what? It was no different than what it was in 1972, 73 with Watergate. Just somebody's caught, and it's even more with the fact that we use emails where somebody used tapes. Okay. Other people use emails. You have the 24-hour news. And, I mean, we don't have the Walter Cronkites. We don't have the Chet Huntleys and David Brinkleys anymore, who were very nonpartisan. They gave you the news. And it was one in which you could form your opinions. It wasn't it's 24-hour news, so the only news that sells is bad news, not good news. And then the news, now we have the news being very polarized as to what their political philosophies are. So, I mean, I think it's never gone away. I think it took a hiatus. I mean, I really got back into the political mode when Ronald Reagan ran against Jimmy Carter, because, again, as I said, I didn't get involved. I didn't even follow politics in 76. I don't think Nixon should have been pardoned. I think he should have stood trial.
What would have happened, do you think, if he would have stood trial?
Oh, the country would have completely imploded. That would have been, if Nixon would have been brought to trial. I think Gerald Ford is another chapter in Profiles in Courage. He had to give it. He had to give it, even though he knew it was probably going to ruin his chances. But he could not allow the country to go through that type of trial to where all the institutions, the whole structure of the federal government was going to come to bear, and the people were already at wit's end. If there was going to be any more, you just wouldn't have had a government anymore, and you had to bring back civility.
Now, ultimately, what was the aftermath?
Vietnam was ending.
Well, I was going to say, what was the aftermath, though, of when Nixon finally didn't resign? After the trial, he walked away. What was the aftermath? He just resigned.
He rather than go through the articles of impeachment were never voted on. So he resigned before the articles of impeachment were done. And then Gerald Ford, who was, brought in as vice president under 25th Amendment after Spiro Agnew, is then moved up to the presidency under the 25th with the resignation of there now. And what Ford did is made the decision to pardon Nixon rather than have the country have to go through a trial. So once he gave the pardon to Nixon was, basically for all intents and purposes off limits at that point. But Nixon still, was the foremost person when it came to foreign policy and how to handle the Russians. At that point, but people had to keep a very, very big arm's length at that point, So, but the worst thing that could have happened to Nixon is go through the humiliation of being the first president to resign.
Now, the stock market crashed afterwards then too, right? So he resigned, stock market crashed, right?
Well, the economy was crashing anyway. Inflation, there were buttons called WIN, which was a whip inflation now. We had stagflation based on the war, the Vietnam War, where we went into so much spending, we overheated the economy. We had an issue with aggregate supply. There was just too much money. We had unions asking for buku dollars, and the country was going through some of the worst inflation. Interest rates were, to buy a home, interest rates were in the 18, 19, 20, 22% at that point. So when the election of 76 came about, but the stock market did show, the economy did show some reaction to it, but not as much as the reaction would have been if there would have been a trial.
Now, what was the psyche of the nation, though? Think about the conversations you had with people. Was it embarrassing?
It was very divisive. I'm telling you that you could get into some pretty damn good arguments. That's all I can tell you. There was some good beer barroom discussions, let's put it that way, of people that were pro and con and everything else. But, I think it was the key is that the people were just at a point of totally losing faith. And I think the other big thing is that most of the baby boomer kids that went to war into Vietnam, went into the services, we were brought up that really our hero was the President of the United States. They were our heroes, and we had such reverence for that office and for the people that did it, that all of a sudden, here comes this realization, these guys aren't the heroes that we think they are. They're crooks. They don't care. So that was even something that we all, you had to contend with, and and it, as I said, you could get into some pretty good fight, heated discussions, as if you want to put it. Depending.
Now,
on
were you able to talk about it though, or was it as? Because now, you talk about this, you're going to get into a fight at the bar. Were you actually able to talk about it?
Yeah. Oh, the whole colleges. When you went to college, that's all that was being taught. It's almost like now, where you hear the news. When you go to classes, because of history and pop, is everybody was talking about Watergate. From almost 72 to 74, all you talked about was Watergate.
And then, okay, so Ron, you there?
Hey, Councilor Mike, how are you?
We're doing good. Hey, Dad, this is Ron, our opinionated veteran. He is one of our co-hosts on the Max Miller Show, and when he knew what we were talking about, just impeachment and Trump and fallout, he was like, "Hey, I got to give my 2 cents in here." My dad I've told Ron a lot about you, Dad, and we were just kind of talking about the fallout of the Nixon impeachment, just like what it was like for the country, what it put basically everyone through. And I thought, Dad, you had a very salient point about being a veteran even, and what that was like for you as a veteran coming back and watching all this, and then almost getting completely disconnected from the political process, almost being dismayed kind of with it. And now, Ron, how old were you during all that? I don't even know. Were you even?
No, born 66.
So you were. That was like. So you were way after.
Way after, but I study history, and and I understand the background and the context, and it would just, in the Army we use military phrases, so it would just lift and shift the whole dynamics and focus of our government to one thing, and all these other things would fall through the crack. But, more importantly, the whole impeachment process for mental illness is a sliding slope, a slippery slope, because who decides what mental illness is worth impeaching?
Exactly.
And you're the subject matter expert. I'll give you an example. The American Psychological Association's been considering caffeine addiction, right? They haven't done it yet, but I'm sure they will. So, like, if you have an addiction to coffee or something, that's a mental illness, a diagnosed mental illness. Does that mean any future president that's addicted to coffee can be impeached? A little ridiculous, but I think you get the point.
The key that I love today is there's only been really actually 2 times, Clinton, Andrew Johnson, and then you had the Nixon, this impeachment. And I really look at it and I'm going, you got to read the Constitution. It's high crimes and misdemeanors. It's almost to the point of treason, where it's treason or whatever. And today, I listen to these guys on TV and I'm going, you guys are making it now that this is a tool to negate the vote, rather than, and everything else. But I said, when you're taking a look, say, even with Nixon, I mean, he was using the CIA to stop the FBI. He was using the IRS to spy on everybody and then using that. That, to me, is, abuse of power. And then the obstruction.
Absolutely.
That to me is, wow. And you were doing it openly and with a purpose. And then you were using the office as a threat, to people, to not to testify, to avoid subpoenas, and then to say to other people, I want you to plead guilty, you'll take the hit, and you'll take the charges. That, to me, is impeachable. But I sit back now and I'm just laughing about the whole thing, to tell you the truth.
I know.
It's become a joke.
I mean, this isn't even. It has. Well, it's almost like they're weaponizing it, and it's all about talking points and political talking points, and who can get the upper hand and make the other person look bad. And I'm gonna segue for a second, and talk about the passing of President George H.W. Bush. He, like him, don't like him, whatever. But one thing he did was he was able to laugh at himself. He had a good heart. You might not have liked his policies, but he believed in service and putting country above self. And we just don't have any of that these days.
No, you're absolutely right.
Michael.
That's exactly what we were talking about in the beginning as almost our it's kind of like the beginning of this thesis statement here about bringing it back to Trump and an impeachment, and that Bush was the last guy, the last real true military guy that would really occupy the office, and that even when push came to shove in an ugly campaign, he's like, we're our president. We're not going to, we're all going to rally behind you. And then all of a sudden, it seems like whenever almost majority of the people that are in there, no military service. It wasn't about country. It wasn't about duty. It was just about politics. It was about, was about partisanship. And now, and Dad, you're absolutely right. Now, this whole idea of impeachment, I mean, we know that, did Clinton lie? Yeah, he lied about getting a blowjob in the office, right? I mean, what? I mean, I'm not saying I agree it's a good thing, but it was weaponized. Politics weaponized to try to impeach the guy.
It was a weapon that was being used by Newt Gingrich and the New Republicans to go after Hillary and Bill. And to me, that was when it got out of hand. This what they were going after.
Well, this is revenge to me. This is the Democrats now going, hey.
So you had a Republican Congress. And then the Senate, it was, you knew it wasn't going to be tried and removed. But it was just the point I saw it. Now we're going to go into a new phase. If you don't like anybody, we're going to have the impeachment. We're going to be able to negate the vote by this use of this
by impeachment.
Yep.
Yeah.
And think about it.
And fathers designed it for.
Well, do you think they've really? And Ron, I'm curious because you're the kind of insider in the politics and everything. I know you've been a little bit more on the Republican end, but have you had any conversations or heard anybody on the more Democratic side going, okay, let's say you impeach the guy. Let's say somehow there's some evidence that they can make happen. Have they thought beyond that? Because as my dad pointed out, after Nixon, you had the stock market crash. You had a recession. I mean, it was just embarrassing for the country and all these awful negative consequences. And it's like, have they thought beyond, okay, we impeach him, now what? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think they have. I mean, I've talked to some Democrats on the Texas legislature, and they're like, hey, the blue wave is not coming. Okay, we're not about open borders. We're not about impeaching. We're not about. But I said, yeah, you're not about. But the party screams, impeach Trump, open the borders, but so there's a dichotomy there about what the actual individual Democrat elected official is saying and what party is saying. Of course, and I'm kind of a fact-based kind of guy. If you give me something of substance with proof, then hey, you should be held to the full extent of the law. But I don't think they're thinking it through. I mean, if Peach isn't Trump, if Trump is impeached, then you're going to get Mike Pence as president. And then what are you going to impeach him? You're going to impeach him until Nancy Pelosi is the next line of successor? Yeah. I mean, I don't know what their plan is.
Well, then you could 25th Amendment him because he says he talks to God every single morning. Hey, I'm a guy of faith now, But great, then we're going to pull him great, we're going to get rid of him now. But no, but now here's the thing: will Trump walk away though? That's the thing because as Dad, you and I were talking off air. Nixon kind of saw the score and was like, all right, I'm going to bail out. It's going to be embarrassing. Now, here's a question, and I'm curious to get both of your opinions. Does Trump walk away in the same scenario if he knows he's going to get impeached, or what if they actually do impeach him?
I personally don't think so. I think he would just use it as a public forum to try to make himself look good and everybody else look bad.
So
he'd go to his base. And he would use that Twitter medium, and it would cause such a constitutional crisis.
Absolutely, yep.
I don't think anybody's truly thinking, and the other part, I was listening last night, and it was about the first time I ever heard somebody do it. They were talking about, Trump, and they're going, does everybody understand? This is the first time we have elected a president that was an international businessman.
Yeah.
That was his, and he goes, I'm not telling you I'm for, I'm not telling you I'm against, but nobody is sitting there thinking is every other president was a career politician. We now have, for the very first time, is a non-politician. He never held a political office. He was an international businessman building hotels and developments nationwide. He's going to have relationships with all these people. The key being is that relationship, was it used in any way to compromise the integrity and the sovereignty of the people of the United States? He said that is the big question,
Right.
And I sat there and went, that was the first person and all this stuff, and I think it's just going to have to play out, and if Cohen is true, what is he really going to say? Is it going to be like John Dean saying, listen to the tapes? Just listen to the tapes.
Yeah.
There's a cancer. I think his best frame was when he said it. There is a cancer on the presidency. And when you listen to the tapes, you will see what I mean. And when the people started listening to the tapes, that it was so obvious, Well,
and that's why. And Ron, I'm curious to get your perspective of this, because I remember, gosh, I was talking to a bunch of friends about this, about the whole Russia thing. They're like, I don't care. It's Russia. He's just working with them. Who cares, right? Now, I'm like, well, they used to be our arch enemy, and they kind of are. They're just very low key about it. I'm curious now, with now Cohen coming out, and it almost bit by bit, you see this. I call it, and in therapy, we call it telling the truth to the evidence that's presented. So when it's like, well, you can lie about it because no one knows anything, but then all of a sudden a piece of evidence comes out that totally refutes what you said. Now you have to kind of retell the truth. And then if it keeps happening, you start realizing that, okay, maybe there is something here that you're not telling the truth. What are you hearing on the military side of, now that maybe it is looking like this guy maybe was working with him? Now, whether or not that's an impeachable offense, hey, that's not, who knows? What are people in the military saying, and is it sitting well with them?
Yeah, and we talked about this before. I mean, Trump still generally has a more favorable impression among the military than Obama did, but it is falling, and I think people are just getting tired of the tweets, the controversy, the allegation, and they just want to get on with the whole thing of governance. Hey, I want my pay raise, I want my GI Bill paid, I want these things. So, in military, we almost have like a kind of a flat affect towards politics because we're prohibited from the joint ethics regulation and doing certain things. So, but what's interesting, since we're talking about the whole Russia thing, is there was a Russian official late last week that said, hey, yeah, we had interaction with Trump International, and I think he was talking about Cohen. But, we treated Trump International just like we do the gazillions of other companies that come to Russia wanting to do business with us. And it was no more or no less and no special than any other company. And nothing ever went through, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, whether that was a plant or a KGB talking points or Cohen paid him, I have no idea. But, you take things on face value.
I mean, do you hear one general?
Let's say.
Well, I say, have you had one general say that this bothers me, that this is a national security threat? I mean, have you come across one high-ranking?
Not to me personally, but, we've all seen it in the news and stuff where, generals have written notes about, his ability to lead and causing, constitutional crisis and stuff like that. But, I mean, I kind of put myself in Trump's shoes. Okay, I'm Trump. And I'm sitting at Trump Tower, and I'm running a campaign. And, I got this business aspect over here, and I tell Cohen and one other guy, hey, go to Russia and see if we can build a hotel. I'm focused on stuff. Maybe Cohen's a schmuck. He's lacking integrity, and, he does things I'm not aware of. How am I going to know? And I'm not trying to justify what happened. I'm just trying to keep things in perspective, they could have acted on their own and done certain things and not have back briefed Trump. And, he's focused on the campaign and all the stuff came out later. But, I'm a big critic of the Mueller investigation, but I also believe in a rule of law. He was appointed. We could debate whether it was a legal appointment or not. And we just have to let it play out and see what happens.
And I think,
And I think,
What, Dad? What are you going to say?
No, I think that's absolutely. I'm sitting back a little bit, like I did a little bit in Watergate. Okay, show me. Because everybody knows the Saturday Night Massacre, that when Nixon got riled. Okay, and again, I'm going back and remembering when Nixon knew some things were starting to leak out. You had the Washington Post with Woodward and Bernstein. They were starting to dig in. The Deep Throat came out, and then the Justice Department had Archibald Cox, which was the special counsel that was doing the investigations. When he started really getting deeper, and all of a sudden started seeing more and more, that is when Nixon wanted, who was it? It was Daniels and the Assistant Attorney General, and then Reichless was the Attorney General. Nixon wanted them to fire the special counsel. Okay, and they wouldn't do it. So Nixon fires Archibald Cox, and the Assistant Attorney General and the Attorney General leave, which that just started the whole ball of wax going on there. That was called the Saturday Night Massacre. My thing is on this is we've already seen Trump go after the Attorney General.
But the thing is, though,
is he going to do something?
But think about Nixon, though, was going after these guys. He was going after them like very strategically. I almost get the sense of Trump isn't going after them. He's going after out of ego. And it's almost and the irony is that if he gets impeached, it's going to be because of his own ego and doing things that made him look guilty. I mean, at least Nixon looks like he had intentionality, which really made him guilty. Trump almost just seems like it's just out of ego and fear that he's doing all this, and that would be the irony of all of it if that's what got him in trouble.
He's like anti-establishment, anti-politician, and he just lashes out.
Yeah.
So,
which to a certain extent I kind of like, but.
So here's my dark question. All right,
you know what? It sounded neat in the beginning, but after 2 years, you're getting tired of it.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I had to turn off his Twitter feed.
Yeah. I was following it a little bit because sometimes some of the stuff was funny.
Oh, absolutely. But I do have a serious question. If and when the impeachment proceedings start, and the entire Senate is consumed for years on end, are you a kettle popcorn guy, a microwave popcorn guy, or are you a stovetop popcorn guy? I mean, really, these are the serious questions we need to explore.
And here's all right. So we'll wrap this thing up because we can make this thing forever, and I want to go watch the Eagles game. All right. So I got a question for both of you. Okay. So all right.
Yep. They're losing.
Thanks, Dad. It's on DVR. Appreciate
the Eagles
that.
have already lost. Yeah.
Damn it. Yeah. Appreciate that. All right. So all right, so given where it's going, and I hear both of you guys are like, hey, let it roll. I also kind of hear that the military guys are basically going, listen, I mean, I'm not hearing this is a national security concern. The Russians are really infiltrating us, which to me goes a very long way. I trust Ron. I trust a lot of the military guys. I haven't heard that. I hear more of the rhetoric. You hear a lot of them talking about the rhetoric is the issue and the politics and the media. So let's say, but I also hear from you guys, you got to let it play out, but let's start wrapping it up. So let's say things come out the way they are. Let's say he was lying about it a little bit. Nothing ill was basically done that kind of like Clinton. What gets him in trouble is that he lied about it to cover his butt. Let's say all that kind of happens, all right? Is it even worth impeaching? If knowingly what happened the last time when Nixon, he wasn't even impeached, but knowingly the effect on the economy, knowing the effect on the national morale, our military, everything, is it even worth it to impeach him if he did some impeachable offenses that have been outlined in that scenario? Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, professionally, I would say yes, because, we are a nation of laws, but then personally, I'm like, is it really worth it in the long run for the downturn in the economy and all the negative effects? But one final point is, foreign meddling in American elections, just like we meddle in everybody else's, is nothing new. I mean, it goes back to even before the 60s when Russians would open up, little groups and fund certain things and buy articles in newspapers. It's just today, it's just somebody can sit in the basement of the Kremlin and tweet. It's just made it that much easier. So, meddling in elections is nothing new. It's just new technology.
And they got caught.
Yeah.
And Trump was right. They're not doing anything that we have not already been doing.
Well, I think you got to go back in the history of the CIA. Ask how many elections or how many assassinations that we did to put in the right government. So, but
we do it all the time.
Yeah, I mean that was the history of the CIA.
So,
but and that came out even during Watergate. That the CIA got its wings clipped a little bit. Iran-Contra got its wings clipped, a little bit. But the key I always look at is this. I don't care what anybody says. Russia is still the Soviet Union. You've got a KGB president. The hatred between the United States and Russia has never ended. If anything, the humiliation that the Russians had with in the Cold War, and the way is still on their mind. And if we leave our guard down for 1 minute, they will come at us. And that's my biggest worry with this whole thing.
I concur 100%.
And that's
George Patton said it. You might as well fight them now because we're going to have to fight them.
There you
at
go.
some point.
And that's the thing, and I could not agree more. And Dad, thank you so much for coming on. Ron, thanks for coming at the end. I know you had some good strong points. Thanks for coming on. And I guess like my closing kind of thoughts, and I think Dad, you nailed it. Is that this country? When you look at if for the reasons that we really think Trump, maybe did some of these things, and we look at the negative effect that it has on the economy and the government psyche and everything, is it, especially for partisan impeachment like Clinton, is it worth it? And I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing where it is worth it. Yeah, I'm not seeing where it's worth it. And that's the thing I think where Democrats have not really thought this through of, let's say they're successful. The ends do not justify the means. It's like they have this victory, but then they destroy everything. That this country kind of stands for. I know it's a strong statement, but you do that will make retribution politics. It will literally destroy the very fabric of what this government is made of, and then that's a road that we will never ever go back down again. The irony that I'm afraid what will happen though, if let's say they do carry through with this, and Ron kind of brought in earlier about the whole Mental Health Act. Now the irony is that if Trump refuses to leave out of his own ego, just out of he is only looking about himself and uses his base to almost start a revolution going, no, I'm not going anywhere. The irony then, we have to have a very serious conversation of when we have a man who's president that would be willing to destroy a country, have a constitutional crisis out of his own ego, out of his own disdain for the very principles that everyone has fought for. Ron, you fought for. My father, you fought for. And I am not cool with that. I hope it doesn't get to that. I hope people actually hear this out and go, it's not worth it. Dad, you said it best when we were talking off the air, is that, we should be talking about, this whole thing is brought about. Russia's really doing some shady stuff where we've been spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on aircraft and new systems. They've been spending billions and billions of dollars on their digital capabilities, on their hackers. They realize that is the new front of war. And that's the thing that no one is talking about. Nobody.
Well, I think that's where, as funny as it sounded, what was it called? The Space Force?
Yep.
I sounded funny, but Ron, do you agree with me? I think that is the new battle.
It's new high ground.
That is. It is. You've got to be on the high ground, and if you control the digital signal in space, you control the domain. And it sounds funny, and people make fun of it, and I just roll my eyes. But I agree with you 100%. We need it. Just like we need to be up in Alaska because we're behind up in Alaska. And anyway, I could go down this whole road, but we need another show. When are we coming back?
We got to do this again. I mean, we definitely this thing is going to be. Well, it seems like every week this thing is playing out. We're gonna have a really exciting show. We're gonna it'll be posted up on Friday night. Mike basically did a psychological experiment on his Facebook and on his friends. And one of my good buddies, Ryan Steltzer, are going to be coming in onto the studio and basically talk about me using him as a guinea pig and showing how easy it is to trigger everyone to getting into a fight and how many people can I bring in. So that'll be real exciting. So everyone tune in on Friday. We'll have that posted up at 7 o'clock in the Eastern time. But this thing is a very fast-moving story with Trump, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this again. But you can't help but note we have three very different people, different backgrounds, different ages, different political beliefs, but we all are coming to the same conclusion. It's not worth it. We need to be looking at what's really important. And, Dad, you said it best. I'm going to end us on this one. It seems like I always end my show with someone else's quote. But I'm going to steal it, Dad, but I'm going to give you credit for it. When you're going, listen, we don't need to be talking about impeachment. We need to be talking about being bipartisan, working together. If we're talking about honoring, I mean, it's so easy to wave a flag and go, we care about our soldiers and our veterans. To me, it is egregious. It is un-American. It is just sociopathic and Machiavellian to have the stupid partisan politics. To me, it spits in the face of every person, every soldier who has ever died, bled, lost a limb, and we have to work together. And if we're going to honor everybody who has fought for everything that we have, we owe it to them. Because if not, we're just taking a piss on every one of their graves. And I believe that strongly about it.
Exactly.
You know, I think
even though go back to Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They made it work.
Yep. And we have to. We owe it to every veteran. I'm a son of a veteran. Friends of many veterans, never fought myself, but it never stands in a way of me realizing the sacrifice that every single one of you guys get. Seeing the sacrifices my clients have given and hearing all their stories. We owe it to them, damn it. That's what the show is about. That's why all of us are doing what it is we're doing. That's why Ron and I are doing our shows. That's why, Dad, you're coming on this show to help us have these conversations. So it's a conversation I hope we continue kind of having. I know we will, whether it be here on Gray Matters on the HC Universal Network. Ron, Opinion Vader. Hey, Ron, talk a little bit about your show on your new network. It'll be starting here soon.
Yeah, we're all three of us are on Talk 1370 out of Austin, Texas. But you can check out my podcast and blog at theopinionatedveteran.com, theopinionatedveteran.com. And I'm going to start a show on Mojo 50 out of Dallas, which should be airing here in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely have you on to help launch that bad boy up. And Dad, we can catch you and catch you on my show and in Easton, Pennsylvania, where you keep the Lehigh Valley locked down.
I hear you.
Well, excellent. Well, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. I know a little bit long today, but hey, this was an important show. We had lots to talk about. So I thank everyone for joining us. As always, once again, catch us in on Friday at 7 o'clock where Mike plays a prank and a psychological warfare on his friends on Facebook. So catch us on that. And of course, always catch all the great shows on HC Universal and catch us on Sundays, Max Miller Show, Voice of the Radical Center, me and Ron. And with that, everyone, just remember, we're not blue, we're not red, we're gray. Let's keep it in the gray, America. You guys have a good night. I will catch you on the flip side.
All right.
Take care. Hey, got your six.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Gray Matters Radio with Michael DeVine. For more episodes and information, visit us online at graymattersradio.com. Join the conversation by following Gray Matters Radio on Facebook and Twitter. Gray Matters Radio is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more live episodes of this and other great shows, download the free HC Universal Network app at hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, remember, think about the gray.